Hey, Emily, what the hell happened? My husband, John, finally arrived at my hospital room after I had a miscarriage. He glanced at me and muttered, "Oh, not again," clicking his tongue. Then he looked at my brother, who had rushed to my side, and said, "So? Who's this guy? Don't tell me you brought another man in here?" In response to John's words, my brother calmly said, "Hey, man, there's a blood-soaked woman with long curly hair trying to hug you from behind. Do you know her?" "What? What are you talking about?" John looked at my brother in shock. My brother pointed his finger at John and said, "That woman right there. She's wearing a large, light green, yes, a peridot ring on her right ring finger." The moment John heard this, his body started trembling. Ugh. With a groan, John bolted out of the room in a panic. "My name is Emily, and I'm 29 years old. I live with my husband John, and I work full-time while managing our household. Since we don't have children, I work as a full-time office employee. We are a couple who eloped. That was 5 years ago. Back then, I was 24 and in my second year of working. Because of my parents' strict rules, I wasn't allowed to attend any social gatherings, even those organized by my company. Though such gatherings decreased significantly the following year, back then it was common for young employees to go out for drinks frequently. My family was very strict about alcohol-related events, and I was told not to attend unless it was absolutely necessary. My colleagues always said I was antisocial, and I felt isolated. One time, I snuck out to a group date. That's where I met my husband, John. He was 6 years older than me, a sharp-looking salesman in a crisp suit. He was introduced as a hard-working guy who excelled at his job. That day, he was very considerate of me, who was not used to such gatherings. He helped me keep up with the conversation, subtly stopped others from making me drink too much, and eventually rescued me from a second round I wasn't enthusiastic about, escorting me to a taxi. He seemed to be such a gentleman back then. I was instantly attracted to him. We started seeing each other and eventually began dating officially. 6 months later, he proposed. I was so thrilled that I accepted immediately. But my family didn't take it well. My family was wealthy, and my father was an executive at a major local trading company. My parents had always told me they would find a suitable match for me, and they were strict about my interactions with the opposite sex during middle school, high school, and college. Looking back, my parents and my only brother, Chris, probably knew that I was not good at judging people. Chris always said, "I'm not going to stop you from being with whoever you like, unlike mom and dad, but at least let me meet him." Chris, 10 years older than me, was someone I could always rely on. But even then, I was hesitant to introduce John to my brother. I was afraid of Chris's perceptive gaze seeing through everything. Rebelling against my parents and avoiding Chris's sad eyes, we ended up eloping. I first moved into his apartment, which led to him being harassed by his boss at his company. My father's company was a client of John's company. We were probably just naive back then. So, we decided to quit our jobs and move to another state. We got married there. Looking back, that might have been our happiest time. Because as soon as we moved, John's attitude towards me started to change. We lived in an old, cheap, cramped apartment compared to where he used to live. We moved there together, but John suddenly told me, "I have to work harder than ever. So, you need to do all the housework." "Okay, then I'll be a housewife." John interrupted me. "Oh, of course, you also need to keep working full-time like before." He said it as if it were the most obvious thing. "Your job is much easier than mine, right? Doing the housework is only fair." I couldn't say anything back to John. Indeed, my earnings were nowhere near John's. After we moved, John took a sales job, and I found a new job myself. But unlike my previous job, which I got thanks to my family's connections, the new job paid less and had worse conditions. The only difference was that most of my new coworkers were older women who looked out for me more than at my old job. I had to buy groceries on my way home and manage all the housework, which I wasn't used to. At his previous apartment, John never let me handle cleaning because of his obsession with his decor. He was also a great cook, often having meals ready by the time I woke up. But after we moved, he stopped doing any of that, leaving everything to me and criticizing my efforts harshly. "Hey, there's dust over here. I'm sorry, I didn't notice. This happened last time too. Don't think someone else will always do it for you." I could only nod and agree. At the time, I thought he was right. At home, I knew how to cook, clean, and do laundry, but I didn't have to do much of it. I suddenly found myself having to take care of not only my own needs but also his. If my efforts didn't meet his standards, he would harshly criticize me, leaving me in a state of constant stress. I would be exhausted and want to sleep, but he would insist on intimate activities. Even if I said I was tired, John never listened. Eventually, he started going out at night more frequently when he was displeased with my attitude. I kept thinking, this is all my fault. And it was. John, who had been a top salesman at a great company, had to leave his career and move to a cramped apartment because of me. So, I believed I had to make it up to him. I was convinced of that. I pushed myself harder, excelling at work and diligently doing housework, waiting for my often absent husband's return. About 2 years into our marriage, I got pregnant. But I miscarried before I even realized I was pregnant. John was shocked and worried, calling an ambulance and staying by my side for a while. I thought his fading affection had returned then. But it was an illusion. After I was discharged and started working again, John began dipping into our joint savings. One day, when I went to update our passbook, I noticed the balance had drastically decreased. "Honey, what have you been spending money on recently?" I nervously showed John the passbook and asked. "That's none of your business. Do you have a problem with what I do? But this is our joint account. We might need it for emergencies, like sudden hospitalizations, for either of us." "Yeah, you're right. But that was your fault for miscarrying." I couldn't comprehend what he said at first. What are you saying?" "It was a miscarriage. Our child died. But it happened because your body did that on its own, didn't it?" I was at a loss for words. "Besides, we can always have more kids in the future. Stop bringing up depressing stuff." And so, John returned to his usual routine. "I will conceive again," I told myself. But no, the child I lost couldn't be replaced by another. Even if I got pregnant again, it would be a different child. For the first time, distrust towards John began to grow in me. 2 years later, I became pregnant again. This time, I was determined to protect the baby, so I planned to reduce my work hours and eventually take maternity leave. However, it was hard to find the right moment to tell John about the pregnancy. John was often away on business trips around that time. But I knew he was lying. When I tried to contact him to share the news, I called his office to find out his location. "Business trip?" John's boss asked me, puzzled. "I didn't send him on any trips. I thought he was on leave for a family funeral." "Didn't you know?" "Oh, I must have been mistaken." "Please don't tell him I asked, it was just a misunderstanding." After hanging up, I felt all my strength drain away. How could he do this? To use such a reason for taking leave. Knowing he wasn't on a business trip, I tried to maintain a normal conversation with his boss. If I hinted that he was lying, John would definitely get in trouble. If that happened, he would blame me, get angry, and might even resort to violence. I couldn't let that happen. I had to avoid that at all costs. I was determined to protect this second child. I remained silent. When my morning sickness worsened, I finally told John the first was pregnant. John grumbled, "Oh great, another money drain." Even though distrust had already begun to grow in me, I couldn't believe he said that. I wanted to believe it wasn't possible. No, that's not right. I wanted to believe it was impossible. By then, I already knew our joint savings account was almost empty. After the first miscarriage, I had been saving up again for the next childbirth expenses. However, because of my growing distrust, I had also been secretly putting money into a separate account little by little. When I saw the joint account nearly empty, I resigned myself to using my own savings. Of course, I kept this secret from John. If he found out, he would demand the money and take it from me. Surprisingly, my workplace became my refuge. Colleagues, especially older women, often noticed and asked, "You don't look well. Are you okay, or you seem tired? At first, I brushed it off and continued working. After over 4 years at my current job, even though the pay wasn't great, I felt comfortable and had good relationships with my colleagues. This was why I had stayed longer than at my first job. When I got pregnant again, my colleagues were more excited for me than John was. I had told them about my previous miscarriage. Many of them had worked since they were young, switching to part-time work after having children. They understood my situation well. They knew I endured my morning sickness and continued working because I feared what John might do if I didn't. Eventually, the company insisted I take leave, saying the policies were there to support me and I needed to rest if I was struggling. So, I was almost forcibly given time off by the company. Take a good rest, and let's work together again, everyone said. Their warm words brought tears to my eyes. Just as I was about to leave, I suddenly collapsed from exhaustion. I didn't realize it at the time, but I had a massive hemorrhage. I later learned that an ambulance was called immediately, and I was rushed to the hospital. When I woke up in the hospital room, my once large belly was shockingly flat. I couldn't immediately understand what had happened. But as the reality sank in, I buried my face in the pillow and cried silently. I reached for my phone in the bag within arm's reach and impulsively called my family home. After a few rings, I realized what I had done and quickly hung up, but the phone soon started ringing again. I couldn't move in my condition, so I could only turn the volume down. Ignoring it was also an option. I answered in a whisper, "Hello. Is that you, Emily?" The familiar voice belonged to my brother. "I knew it was your number. Why did you hang up? What happened?" I couldn't hold back my sobs as I slowly told him about the loss of my second child. He listened silently. When I calmed down, he spoke in a gentle voice. "You've been through a lot." My brother was still as kind as ever. "Where are you now?" "Sorry, I'm at the hospital. I can't move. I'm in bed." "I see, it's not safe to talk on the phone. I'll come to you right away." "Where are you?" I told him the name of the hospital. I had learned the name from the nurse when I woke up. It was relatively close, just in the next state over. "Got it. Hang in there. I'll be there soon." Hearing my brother's voice for the first time in 5 years was a relief. I wondered how he was doing. We had lost touch, so I worried if I might be intruding if he had a wife now. These thoughts swirled in my mind. A few hours later, my brother arrived at my hospital room. It seemed to be a shared room, but there were few people around. Seeing him, I managed to call his name while still lying down and cried in his arms. "What happened?" I started sobbing and told him everything that had led to this point. Especially how I had tried to take good care of this pregnancy, considering what happened last time. I felt relieved when I could finally take time off work, but maybe I had just exhausted myself. My body must have reached its limit. The life that was supposed to be there could no longer be. "You've been through a tough time." He stroked my hair gently. "By the way, where's John? Haven't you contacted him yet?" I shook my head. I heard from the hospital staff that they contacted his company. "So, I'm waiting, but he hasn't come yet. But you know, I'm very angry." I was about to apologize when my brother said, "No, not that. I'm angry that you didn't introduce him to me first." "That's because..." As I was about to speak, the door to my hospital room opened again. "Hey, Emily, what the hell happened?" It was John. He glanced at me and muttered, "Oh, not again," clicking his tongue. "So? Who's this guy? Did you bring another man here?" No, this is my brother." Just as I started to explain. "Hey, you." My brother was staring intently at John, with a slight frown. "What? Do you have a problem with me?" "No," my brother said, narrowing his eyes. "But there's a blood-soaked woman with long curly hair trying to hug you from behind. Do you know her?" "What?" John looked at my brother in shock. My brother pointed at John and said lightly, "Yeah, that woman. She's wearing a large light green, yes, a peridot ring on her right ring finger." He spoke as if he were talking about the weather. The moment John heard this, his body started trembling. He seemed to finally understand what was being said. What are you talking about? John's loud voice was inappropriate for the setting. Please be quiet, this is a hospital. I'm just telling you what I see. Oh, and her curly hair is quite tight, probably because it's wet. She looks a bit younger than Emily, maybe a college student? What are you saying? That woman is clinging to your neck, smiling with bright red lips. My brother mimicked the woman's actions, making John shiver. No, you're talking nonsense. I just see her, I don't know who she is to you. Ugh. With a groan, John rushed out of the room in a panic. What did you see this time, brother? Exactly what I said. Anyway, I'll step outside to make a call. Wait here. My brother left the room. So, John had seen something like that. I sighed deeply. The reason I didn't want to introduce John to my brother before we got married was because of my brother's ability to see spirits. He's always been that way. He would find things I lost and sense bad energy around me, like when I was isolated at school. He even complained about needing sunglasses when visiting graveyards. It was part of my everyday life back then. But because of that, I was scared of what my brother might say about John, especially since my whole family was against him. My brother could see through everything. That's why I ran to a place out of his sight. Of course, that wasn't the only reason. Eventually, my brother returned. Sorry for the wait. Who did you call? I'll tell you later. Then, with a serious expression, he asked, do you plan to stay with him? I remained silent. I kept gripping and re-gripping the blanket cover. It's hard, isn't it? Come back home. But what about your family? If I return, it will be to our family home. Our family home, which my brother would inherit. If he was married, I'd be an intrusive sister-in-law. Ah, I'm still single, he said. You're still single? Yeah, with this ability of mine, it's hard to find a woman without any secrets. Being able to see things like that isn't just convenient. When I walked into this room earlier, I immediately knew you weren't happy. There was a dark aura around you. A dark aura. Remember when you were wrongly accused and ostracized by your classmates? It's the same negative energy surrounding you now. You're not happy at all, are you? Tears began to fall from my eyes again, uncontrollably. Then I nodded vigorously and said, yes. I can't take it anymore. I want a divorce. I thought having a child would make things better, but it was pointless. Yeah, I think the child inside you was trying to tell you that things can't go on like this. You need to come back home. I'll handle him. Handle him? I asked, wiping my tears and tilting my head. You'll see soon enough, my brother replied firmly. After I was discharged, I returned home. My parents were shocked to see me after so long. They had every reason to be angry about my sudden elope, but my emaciated appearance must have moved them more. You've really had a hard time, my mother said, hugging me tightly. You've learned a lot from this long life lesson, my father added. And since I needed to rest for a while, I submitted a request for extended leave to my company. I also mentioned that I might resign. They probably sensed that I was considering a divorce after witnessing my second miscarriage. You had good people at your company. My brother said, watching me respond to my colleagues. Yes, it was my only sanctuary, I replied. I finally realized that I could never truly relax at home. A few days later, John came to our family home. Excuse me, I know Emily is here. Let me see her, he demanded rudely at the door. My mother was the first to respond, saying firmly, I cannot let you see Emily. But I have something to discuss with you, she added. And what might that be? John asked, taking the bait. I'll get straight to the point. Please divorce Emily. Is that what Emily wants? Yes, she doesn't want to see you. Really, he said, entering the living room as my mother invited him in. I watched from the next room. John plopped down on the sofa and looked around. I guess the rich girl couldn't handle that lifestyle. He began to badmouth me in front of my mother. It's despicable for a wife to run back to her parents' house over such trivial matters. It says a lot about how you raised her. My mother listened silently until there was a knock on the door behind her. She responded, "Come in." Then my brother appeared. "Your turn, Chris." "Yeah, leave the rest to me." John let out a startled eek. "Chris." "Yes, it's been a while since the hospital," my brother said. John tried to get up from his seat. But he couldn't get up. John found himself pinned down by a strong force on his shoulders. As my brother entered the room, our family security personnel, who had entered from the same door John had used, were holding him down. Coming from a long line of a respectable family, we always had a few people on standby. My brother sat down in front of John, replacing my mother, and began to speak. "Now, there are a few things I want to ask you." "What do you mean?" My brother glanced at John's side and pointed. "Yes, today she's clinging to your side, that woman." "What are you talking about? Do you know this person?" My brother pulled out several photos of a woman and placed them on the table in front of John. John gasped again. "How did you?" He started to say but then stopped. "No, I don't know her." And then, as if it was an afterthought, he feigned ignorance. "Really? Because I can see her arms slowly tightening around your neck." "You haven't noticed, have you?" "What are you saying?" "Well, I can see things others can't. But I know that alone isn't proof of anything, so I had our people look into it." "Do you know this woman?" My brother pulled out a sketchbook showing the woman's image. My brother can draw quite well, which helps when explaining things that others can't see. He showed me a drawing of the woman, with long, swaying hair, blood-soaked and clinging to John with a resentful yet smiling expression. It was eerie. But that wasn't all. When my brother explained that her hair was wet, I asked him what he meant. He casually replied, "Well, she's probably no longer among the living." For my brother, who has always seen such things, it was a straightforward observation. Though he struggled with this ability when he was younger, he has since come to accept and understand it well. My brother continued, speaking to John. "It turns out this woman is currently missing. I told you, I don't know her. According to our investigation." My brother ignored John's words and continued. "We looked into the situation a bit more. Here's the investigation report." I had seen it too. After the woman appeared at the hospital, my brother contacted our lawyer and, through him, the police. Of course, he didn't mention his ability to see spirits. He just said he had reason to believe she might be someone they were looking for. Our family's influence in the area likely played a role in the police taking the matter seriously. The woman had disappeared last year, and her family had filed a missing person report. She lived near our apartment in the neighboring state. I started to think that perhaps John had started seeing her around the time he began staying out and using our savings. Could it be that she is? I had asked my brother when he showed me the investigation results. Probably, he replied evasively. Now, my brother was likely trying to get the truth out of John. "Since about 2 years ago, you've been spending a lot of money and going on a lot of business trips, haven't you?" "That's a personal matter." "It doesn't concern you." "It does. You spent my sister's hard-earned money on this woman, didn't you?" As my brother continued calmly, John grew increasingly agitated. "That's strictly a matter between husband and wife." "Yes, and because of that, I think Emily should divorce you already." "No, that's not going to work for me." John dismissively rejected the idea. "Why?" "Well, I understand. It's because you'd lose a worker, right?" John clicked his tongue in annoyance again. After a moment's thought, he said, "I could divorce her, but could you help me out a bit?" He made a circle with his fingers. "What? Are you asking for money in exchange for the divorce?" "Of course. You all were against it, so she couldn't come home. I could have divorced her anytime, but I felt sorry for her having nowhere to go. So I stayed married." I felt nauseous hearing John's words. While I was waiting silently for him, that's what he had been thinking all along. "Besides, you guys barged in on me. Because of that, I had to change jobs. Things have only gotten worse since then. Is it so wrong to get a little compensation for that? How about this? If you were a decent guy." "What?" John started to get up, but he was held back and couldn't stand. I told you we had you investigated, didn't I? My brother turned towards the door. Standing there were the police, who had been waiting. Why are the police here? I told you we had you investigated. You're a bit sloppy. But it's better for you to be caught here. If not, that woman would have kept tightening her grip on you, strangling you along with your hair. She looks pretty angry. What do you mean? My brother looked sideways. After nodding several times, he said, so this peridot is fake. When she confronted you about it during the trip, you lost your temper, right? Shut up, shut up, shut up. Whether it's real or fake, she was happy when she got it. So that's what it means to incriminate oneself. The police, who had been waiting, flashed their badges and said, "Sorry, but we need to ask you about the disappearance and body disposal of Amanda Taylor. Please come with us." Our security let go of his shoulder and handed John over to the police. I finally felt like I could breathe. I slowly walked into the room. Emily. Were you listening to all that? I won't allow a divorce. You can say whatever you want, but I've already decided. You didn't take it seriously when I lost our child. Not just the first time, but even the second time, John only glanced at my flat stomach. I deeply regret choosing you. John was at a loss for words. What have I been doing? I wasted my time, energy, and money on someone like you. It's ridiculous. John's eyes and mouth opened wide in shock, as if he couldn't believe what I was saying. Goodbye. We won't be seeing each other again. I'll leave the rest to my lawyer. Wait, Emily, hold on. Let's go. Though he still looked like he had something to say, the police nudged John forward and took him away. Later, as a result of the police investigation, John confessed. Apparently, Amanda was a nearby student. She was younger than me and wanted to marry John, whom she met through a sugar daddy arrangement. So, she pressured him to divorce me. However, to John, I was still a source of money. This time, his final goal was to use the threat of divorce to extort money from my family. Amanda was likely nothing more than a fling for John. During a trip to the mountains, they argued about the fake ring, and when he roughly shoved her, she fell and hit her head. Maybe that could have been seen as an accident. But then John dragged her and pushed her off a cliff. Because this mountain area was not part of the initial search zone, Amanda's whereabouts remained completely unknown, making the search difficult. Later, based on John's confession, I learned that she was found buried in grass near a spring in the mountains. John was rearrested and was certain to face a long prison sentence. Through my lawyer, I got him to sign the divorce papers, and I finally became free. I'm off. Take care. Good luck with your new start. Encouraged by my mother's words, I took my first step towards my new job. I had quit my previous job entirely and returned to my parents' home to rest and recover both physically and mentally. After regaining my health and stability, I started job hunting. The 5 years I lived through might have toughened me up a bit, despite my sheltered upbringing. I'd like to think I'm more resilient than I was during my first office job. But for now, I'm done with marriage for a while. Considering I lost 2 children, I want to stay away from marriage and pregnancy for a while longer. My brother is also waiting for the gloom around me to lift and for me to become more serene. I don't know what the future holds, but this time I want to cherish myself and those around me.